The people who say to me Liverpool is a unique place are usually people from outside Liverpool, to be honest.
You go anywhere in the world and I think a Scouser way back was always respected, and you'll find that a Scouser in every port of the world.
Liverpool is a wonderfully non-English city, even though it is based in England. Of course, its buildings and everything have got their back turned on England.
You think about movements, and Liverpool is unique in that way for the movement of people in and out of it.
Certainly, Liverpool is certainly a very creative city. And I think that, again, is to do with, as you know yourself, the influences coming in overseas.
Now, it's a saying in Liverpool that we look outward to the sea rather than look inward to the land.
Liverpool has a disproportionate influence upon the psyche of the planet, considering its size and its location and what it is.
Liverpool people themselves are, I suppose, was sentimental because of Irish extractions and what have you,
I think one of the things that Scousers have got is a sense of identity, is a sense of place, and they hold it dear.
You walk along the street, you keep on meeting somebody, you know somebody else. It's a village.
It's quite tiny, everyone knows your business. Well, that's okay. That's okay, because everyone's your mate.
Liverpool is this great world seaport, but its bread and butter has always been its control of the Irish Sea.
The Irish connection is there in Liverpool's history from the very beginning. King John creates Liverpool as a base for his military operations in Ireland. And in the 18th century, Liverpool's first trading sphere is the Irish Sea. It's the first scene of Liverpool's great mercantile expansion. And again, in the middle of the 19th century, you've got a great wave of immigrants from Ireland. Some of them stay in the city, others go on to the Americas. And through into the 20th century, Liverpool's connection with Ireland is a very strong sporting element, and to do with football and to do with the Grand National. So that connection between Liverpool and Ireland is really Liverpool's oldest cultural contact.
When we look at our operation here with modern vessels, we still have the same problems as King John had with his long ships, where the weather is that much worse during the winter with the prevailing westerly gales that affect us in the same way.
On the winter time, North Atlantic is not so pleasant. Most of the time it's always windy, or if it's not windy, it's lots of fog. You have the whole Atlantic is coming in with all the swell and high seas, so it can be very rough sometimes.
We might be able to combat the conditions of strong tide and wind better than John's ships were able to, but the end result is the problem of the winter weather that makes Liverpool on occasions untenable.
John Curry, who's an elder statesman of the pilots, has this theory that the name Liverpool originated from Norman French and indeed Latin.
So when we look at the agreement between King John and Fitzwarren 800 years ago, we have the word Liverpool for the first time that's been produced in writing amongst the Latin. Li we have as thee. There is springtime, as in primavera, the present Italian, and we have pul from pulvinarium, meaning anchorage, the springtime anchorage.
The pilot was the man with local knowledge, and knowledge of the tides, knowledge of the dock where you were going and everything else. And as I say, the trade was cutthroat. The Liverpool pilots would be down south of Ireland, sometimes in just rowing boats.
Liverpool is a very exciting pilotage. We have heights of tide in excess of 10 metres and the water comes in at the rate of more than 2 centimetres a minute. That's a bit like turning the bath tap on. And when the tide goes out, if you're on a deep drafted ship, you've got to remember that somebody's pulled the plug out and it's going down at the rate of 2 centimetres a minute. The most dangerous part of a pilot's job is undoubtedly boarding and disembarking. The boarding conditions today were fine. The wind has been up to force 8, 9 overnight, but during the day it's calmed down. And nobody wants to be out in heavy weather, but we have to, that's our job. When you saw me come on board, I often think they forgot about the pilot boarding, because that really doesn't fit in with the excellence of the rest of the ship, to climb up into a pilot's doorway and then find yourself climbing up like a submarine hatchway ladder until you reach the main deck, and then onto the lift to get you up to the 11th, 12th deck of this magnificent vessel.
Like being away to sea gives you an opportunity to be a little freer than you can be. Once you've tasted freedom, you won't settle for anything less.
Well, Liverpool, I think, is exceptional in the sense that it is the great seaport, and as a great seaport, it's predominantly built around casual labour and labour markets where earnings are extremely irregular.
Yeah, and I think the big difference between Liverpool and some of the other cities that it's usually compared with is the lack of a clocking on industrial workforce in Liverpool. It sets up people in opposition to a system. But it also gives them a sense of agency, a sense of actually owning their own time in a way that they don't have in factory cities. Certainly they contrast themselves with Manchester and with the textile districts. These are places where a huge percentage of the male workforce is in behind closed doors all day, set times of the day, weekly wages, stable work. Compare that to the situation in Liverpool, where the bulk of the male workforce are casualised. Effectively, they're either working in docks, or they're working in warehouses, or they may be on ships. But the fact remains that Liverpool's working class culture in the 19th century does consider itself to be a step above the factory classes. It really gives the place a sense that it's in charge of its own destiny, that however poor it is, however oppressed and downtrodden it is, it nonetheless is a city that doesn't have to clock on.
And that puts, I think, loads of people in a similar position of feeling that they're very dependent upon luck, fate, the tides, and so on. And when everybody's in that position, there's a mutual understanding and a reciprocal arrangement. You help others out when you're flush, and the understanding that when you hit bad times, you expect them to help you out.
Well, the truth of the matter is, I was sent away to sea for my own good, because at a young age, I was obviously mixing with the wrong type of friend, if you want to call it that, you know, and I was getting into a little bit of bother.
In the summer, we used to stay at home, and in the winter we'd look for a ship and go away to sea for the winter.
Through various people, one of which was my probation officer, swung it so I could go away to sea. The enjoyment was like listening to sailors who'd been somewhere else, you know. I mean, I never went to Valparaiso, but it was like the absolute heaven for Scousers. They absolutely loved you, the girls ashore.
I joined the Southern King, who went down to the Falklands. We went to Norway, picked 500 Norwegians and took them down to the whaling station in South Georgia.
The way the sexual climate here was like, there wasn't one, you know, but if you went abroad, and people were very different, you know what I mean? Like, it gave you a chance to, in some small way, in a natural way, be free.
Well, the freedom of it, like, really was, I'm talking about myself as an individual, as being a young boy, young man at sea. You're getting paid for seeing the world, although you're working hard for doing it.
But I suppose when the first thing hit you was the light in the Mediterranean and the water, watching dolphins, you know, at night, phosphorescent water, flying fish, all kinds of stuff.
And to me, it was just an eye opener, you know, because of the people that you're mixing with.
Freedom, it was your freedom, like, you know, you wanted to do it and you'd done it.
No, although I didn't know it at the time, that was my birthright. That's our birthright. You know, it's, you know, to feel uninhibited, even in a small way, was, although you weren't to know at the time, so wonderful.
The lads who were in the 70s and 80s, when unemployment was unbelievably high on Merseyside and Liverpool, then there wasn't as much chance for them to join something like the merchants and go abroad as their dads did or their uncles did, and come back with the monkey and come back with the parrot, which everyone did. Everyone's uncles had started to do it, and they threw it out because it froze in the winter, and they had to throw it out with the normal rubbish in the entry. And maybe in the late 70s, 80s, the lads are thinking, well, hang on, you know, I haven't got the chance to go abroad as like my uncle did, or my granddad did, or my dad did in the war, or doing the Archangel run, or with the merchant in the 50s, 60s. So Liverpool was another outlet whereby if they were there, then you were going to go and watch them.
Yeah, even the pre-season tours, people went on, so it's not just success. It's not just like Liverpool winning European Cups and all that. It's pre-season friendlies in Stuttgart and Anderlecht and stuff, where there was nothing at stake. Everybody went anyway. There was almost be like 300 or 400 Liverpool lads, inverted commas, not like scarf-wearing fans. They'd be like the lads en masse, just to have a laugh, to get away, because you were all on the dole here, so you might as well duck and dive over there instead of sitting on your ass here, you know. So a good laugh, you know. And the old cliche, travel broadens the mind. I mean, it did make you a better person for travelling, you know.
Oh, certainly grown up.
Yeah.
It made me go with 16 first time I went into the Bruges second leg that you were for good far.
Yeah, yeah.
I loved it.
Yeah.
And I think all of a sudden you start thinking a bit more like a man.
Liverpool's always had a tradition of black merchant seamen from early 19th century, I suppose, probably even before.
I had a fear of drowning. That was something I had to overcome before I actually went to sea. And I found out the reason why was because it was the connection with, you know, the slaves who were thrown overboard to collect for the insurance during, you know, the transatlantic slave trade. And I had this fear that I'd had chains on me and that I would, if I jumped in, I would sink right to the bottom. It's not a case of the past dictating who you are. It's a case of you embracing the past so you know what you can become. James Baldwin, he's an American writer, he said, "Know from whence you came, for there is no distance to where you can go."
What we have is the maximum size of ship that one can dock into the Liverpool docking system, and that's through the Gladstone Lock. We don't have a lot of room, 292 metres long, 32.5 metres wide, or in the beam. We will perhaps be no more than half a metre or less parallel off the lock side. If we look down over the forepart of the ship there to the containers on the side, a practical tip from a pilot is quite simply that if I could, in my mind's eye, put one of those containers between the side of the ship and the wall, I'm going to hit the other side of the ship. 55,000 tons gross, and you don't have to land very heavily to do an awful lot of damage.
I mean, if you see the giant ACL ships coming through the lock gates, I mean, basically it's inches to spare, you know, either side. The tugboats and the pilots obviously bringing them in, the skill that they have bringing them in is quite incredible. You make one wrong move on it and you've scraped either half the paint away or damaged the ship itself, which is more important, or took away half the ship's wall. So it is quite incredible when you see a giant ship coming in.
In the 18th century, Liverpool was undoubtedly one of the great port cities of the world, and as such, it embodied what I think is one of the main characteristics of a deep-sea sailing ship at that time. That was the motley crew. Sailors on board these deep-sea vessels were from all parts of the globe. Ships that were sailed out of a place like Liverpool would have local people, but they would also have Irishmen, they would have Africans or African Americans, they would have people from Europe, Greece, the Netherlands, and this of course is the origin of the phrase motley crew.
I sailed with crews from all around the country, but I did sail a few times with Liverpool crowds, and you know, that was quite interesting because although they were Liverpool crowds, they're from all over the city. You know, like I sailed with Maggie Booths, which is, I sailed a couple of trips with them. Now that was like the world in one city, as they called it. This was the world in one ship, because on it we had Indian crew, Chinese, Africans, you know, ourselves, you know, white British, whatever you want to call us. But they were all Scousers.
Well, the port city itself embodied that same reality, because when they came home to port, they always brought these people with them, and that made for a very different social composition.
This is the Pitt Street area of Liverpool. It's an area which historically can boast the oldest Chinese community in Europe, the oldest black community in Britain, and in many respects the world lived in this particular area, because in that street that was the site of emigrant houses for people going off to the United States, to Canada and to Australia. So in the 1900s and early part of the 20th century, that was the site where people would stay and be billeted before they joined the liners to take them off to their new lives in the new world.
I'd like to think Liverpool was a cosmopolitan melting pot in a way that other cities were not. I mean, Liverpool attracts me as a 19th century historian because it was really in the 19th century a great world seaport. I mean, it was a tremendous city. It was second metropolis. It was the great second city of empire. So I think it did have all sorts of people here, whether they were transients, you know, simply changing ship here or whatever, whether they were people staying put for a little while, whether they were people who settled. And also, of course, whether they might be those people who always intended to go farther on, but I'm afraid got caught out by Liverpool street economy and one or two sharpers and fraudsters and lost their possessions and had nowhere else to go and ended up staying in Liverpool. So I think Liverpool has a demographic, ethnic mix completely different from what you would find in the adjacent industrial districts, which makes it all the more exciting to me as a historian.
My father's family come from Strasbourg. My mother's family were from the days of the famine. They had to survive, so that's where all the Mary Ellens come from. They originated their grandmothers and great-grandmothers from the 1840s. They were all hawkers and they used to go out selling fish, anything to live. And it's handed down family to family. And that's where it comes from most probably our Irish descendants. And our grandfathers and grandmothers, great come off the boat and they had to survive. It's just like modern day immigration now. We're getting all these foreigners in. God help them. I wouldn't be here only for an immigrant. I wouldn't be born. So you look at life in that respect and think, give them a chance. America was built on immigrants. The United States was built on immigrants. So I know it's hard for us to think there's people out to work and That's life. That's the way life goes.
The fact that my dad was a merchant seaman was very exciting for me as a kid. The other thing was that he actually spoke Portuguese, Spanish and German fluently because he'd made it his business to learn those languages. And I think growing up in an area like this, you grew up with an appreciation of other people and their cultures and a respect for their cultures and those people from different parts of the world. And in many respects, that was an eye-opener and a broadening of the mind for me. And it certainly must have been for him as a young kid growing up in this area, because he talked with fondness about the Chinese restaurants, the various aspects of Chinese culture that he'd observed as a kid, where they played mahjong and things like that here in these houses, and hearing it from outside, because it sounds a little bit like somebody playing dominoes and stuff, and all of that kind of richness. I mean, I feel very fortunate that I had a father who could talk to me about other parts of the world with clear insight into it, but I believe the origins of his clear insight into other parts of the world and people from other parts of the world was born and reared on these streets here in Liverpool.
What makes Liverpool distinctly different to other parts of the world is that you can go anywhere in the world, but you find that in Liverpool you take a bit that Scouse identity with you. And I remember saying to a friend some time ago that, I am an African Scouse. She asked me, "Who are you?" And I said, "I'm actually an African Scouser. Too right I am."
One of the most important things about Liverpool is that it has a very long tradition of embodying maritime radicalism. Now, this is